Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. The past decade or so has seen the television industry transform in ways that left a lot of the old guard behind, in one way or another. Cable channels whose scripted programming once had the attention of millions of people now feel relegated to afterthoughts, as massive streaming platforms absorb more and more of the available TV audience. I feel like these things kind of happen so gradually that we didn't think that much about it. But I do love thinking about TV, so that's why I wanted to go back and hone in on one basic channel cable specifically, the USA Network. Once a ratings powerhouse with their original programming, the channel is down to a single scripted show, the well-received Chucky, but now mostly consists of cheap reality TV shows, sports, and the channel's long-standing relationship with professional wrestling. It's not dead and buried, but like most cable channels, it's obviously on the downslope. Now, the USA Network has been around for decades and decades. It first started going by that name in 1980, and I obviously won't have time to cover all of that in this video, so I really wanted to focus on the period of their history with the most sustained success. The Characters Welcome or Blue Sky programming era that lasted from the early 2000s to the mid-2010s. Shows like Psych, Burn Notice, and Royal Pains, which helped define the channel's identity, and are the exact kind of easygoing, mostly episodic TV that has lost a lot of momentum in the streaming era. It wasn't that long ago that USA was one of the biggest brands in American television. So what changed? That's what I'm hoping to shed some light on this week. So in the late 80s and early 90s, the USA Network didn't have a consistent identity when it came to their original scripted shows. They were kind of all over the place, though they did have two throwback anthology shows that I actually appreciate a lot. The underrated sci-fi anthology Ray Bradbury Theater, and the new Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which attempted to remake episodes of Hitchcock's classic original show. They also saved Airwolf from cancellation, which was an 80s TV favorite for many, though their season 4 is pretty much universally agreed to be the worst year of the show because USA slashed its budget and replaced its main cast. There's some minor hits here and there, like co-producing William Shatner's Tech War and doing the later seasons of Silk Stockings, which originated on CBS. La Femme Nikita, a TV remake of the French film, did great numbers for them, but that was just a Canadian CTV show that they bought the US rights to. Overall, it was clear that USA wasn't exactly a major TV player when it came to scripted television. All due respect to their show Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills, of course, a show that sci-fi.com called the Room of Power Rangers knockoffs. The channel would be changed almost overnight by one show, a humble little comedic detective series about a man with severe OCD, Monk. While the show doesn't seem to be all that well remembered now, at least online, it's hard to overstate how big of a deal this show was for the channel at the time. Initially created with the intention to be an ABC show starring Michael Richards, best known for playing Cosmo Kramer in Seinfeld, the project found itself in development hell for a few years, before finally emerging as a family-friendly detective dramedy on USA. And it was an instant success, becoming debatably the channel's flagship show very quickly. And I gotta say, I was a huge fan as a kid. My family and I watched that show every week for years and years. Looking back on it now, Monk isn't exactly ambitious. In many ways, it's very bog-standard TV stuff. Adrian Monk, a genius detective with OCD, solves cases every week while also trying to piece together the answer to who murdered his wife. Like I said, very basic TV stuff. What elevated Monk and set it apart was Tony Shalhoub's great and perfectly calibrated performance in the lead role. Whether a scene called for over-the-top comedy, tragedy, or genuine fear, Shalhoub was always locked in. Audiences and critics both loved the character, leading him to get an Emmy nomination every single year the show was on, and winning a few of them. But the real impact of Monk wouldn't be seen on the network until a few years later, mostly because the 2002 TV season also brought with it USA's The Dead Zone, an adaptation of Stephen King's novel that attempted to combine the imagery of David Cronenberg's iconic film with a more cable TV friendly format, and at least initially, it really worked, delivering big ratings. This would lead to more vaguely spooky sci-fi shows getting greenlit, with the biggest being the 4400, a solid, if short-lived hit about a group of 4400 missing people who suddenly return to Earth. Honestly, that show could use a whole video of its own because it's a genuinely interesting series, but I don't think it really defined the identity of the network in the same way that this next show I'm about to get into did. It also has to be mentioned that the year after Dead Zone and Monk, 2003, was the year that the network was bought by NBC Universal, who was willing to pump far more money into original programming. In 2006, USA made the obvious choice to produce another show in the Monk model, a heavily comedic weekly whodunit about a strange detective. It was a safe bet and it paid off, delivering the highest rated cable premiere of the year. The show was Psych. It followed Sean Spencer, a quippy, fast-talking crime solver who pretended to be a psychic to solve murders. Once again, this premise is not anything special. American TV in the 2000s was so obsessed with quirky detectives like this that another show with the exact same premise but played totally seriously, The Mentalist, began on CBS a couple years later. The real draw here was the cast, and especially the buddy comedy pairing of James Roday's Sean and Dulé Hill's Gus. This is another show that I watched a ton of when I was younger. Honestly, a lot of the comedy can be pretty grating to me now, and the pop culture nostalgia pandering doesn't get more broad or obvious than it does in this show, but if this cast and their sense of humor clicks with you, the whole thing just goes down so smooth. So smoothly, in fact, that it ran for 8 seasons and is still getting new TV movies on Peacock, following in the footsteps of past TV detective shows like The Rockford Files and Columbo, which both also got TV movies years after they wrapped up. With Monk and Psych on the air, USA locked into a formula that worked for them, taking pretty standard TV premises and getting the audiences to embrace them by finding leads that would really pop in big, broad performances. They introduced the characters welcome slogan to underline this, and to signal that USA was the place to go to find shows with memorable, often comedic performances. This went hand in hand with what would come to be known as the Blue Sky era of the network, that would define it for years to come. But what did Blue Sky television mean exactly? Well, HBO, FX, and later AMC was busy establishing more emotionally complex, violent, and serialized television in shows like The Sopranos, The Shield, Mad Men, and Breaking Bad, USA wanted to be the channel to turn to for fun, episodic, family-friendly, far more optimistic television. No one would mistake Psych for The Wire, but it definitely wasn't meant to be. Psych provided reliable and cozy whodunits, and like almost all USA shows at the time, had Vancouver, Canada stand in for sunny American locales like Southern California and Miami. And speaking of Miami, we should talk about 2007's Burn Notice. While Psych might be the network's longest running show, Burn Notice is the series I think about when I hear USA. This thing is everything a USA Network show aspires to be. There's some spy action, some reliably fun character interactions thanks to Bruce Campbell's Sam Axe, and a mildly overarching story that can be stretched out for years. And you know what? It works. Burn Notice is never making a best of TV list for me or anything like that, but it definitely understood its strengths, and was almost always a nice, breezy watch. Light and breezy is a good way to describe most of the network's output. For better or worse, they were the hard seltzer brand of television. And if that's what you came to the channel for, USA was eager to have you covered. Sure, some of it was really bland. Like, I was never able to lock into Covert Affairs, which kind of felt like Alias without the personality. But being mild and generally inoffensive was just a cornerstone of the USA scripted brand. And all it took was the right leads to elevate these standard premises. Shows like Royal Pains and White Collar did just that, balancing the bog standard TV plotting with memorable central performances that the fans loved. White Collar especially clicked well. I was never a huge fan of the show, but it once again showcased the strength of their light buddy comedy formula, as Matt Bomer's Neil Cafferty went on to be a breakout character in the early 2010s. Eventually though, things started to shift. USA's style of blue sky TV had a huge audience and was beloved by millions of people. But with the streaming space heating up, it was hard to keep viewer attention and especially conversation going with these very safe, very episodic shows. I think what you see in shows like 2011's Suits and the expensive 2012 miniseries Political Animals is an attempt to merge USA's blue sky style with the more grounded, prestige TV storytelling of FX or HBO. And they weren't totally unsuccessful at that either, as Suits was a solid hit that ran for years. Still, it was clear with the advent of streaming that the simple, episodic structure of most USA shows was rapidly falling out of fashion. A change was needed, and like Monk over a decade earlier, one show came along to redefine what the USA Network brand could be. Sam Esmail's Mr. Robot debuted in the summer of 2015 and changed everything once again. Now, Suits and Royal Pains were still both on the air, but in my mind, the blue sky era ended the second this show started. If you squinted, you could still see the roots of USA's characters welcome approach to TV here. After all, the show was built on the back of Rami Malek's unique and interesting performance as a great hacker, which isn't unlike Monk, Psych, or White Collar's weird but genius leads. But that's about where the similarities end. Mr. Robot was a highly serialized and fairly dark show that leaned into political and social commentary and definitely didn't take place in sunny Miami. The show was well received upon release, and USA was more than happy to relaunch their channel around its success. The breezy spy shows you could watch with your grandma were out. USA was trying to win dramatic series Emmys now. Mr. Robot never quite reached the heights of popularity that it had in that first season, and I consider it a fairly flawed show, but overall, I do think it was a worthy experiment, and I understand why the channel wanted more shows in that vein. Here's the problem. The post-Mr. Robot years of the network are kind of a wilderness period. Stripped of their blue sky identity and replacing characters welcome with We the Bold, USA hasn't been able to consistently find their footing with mainstream audiences again. They bet big on science fiction with Colony, an alien invasion show from Lost producer Carlton Cuse. And while it was far from an outright failure, I think it was maybe a bit too bland to capture much attention. For a few years there, it was almost all a string of 1 to 3 season shows. Some were fairly solid, like Queen of the South, and some were instantly forgettable, like the Bourne TV tie-in Treadstone, but nothing was really catching on. I associate the back half of the 2010s with USA losing its identity, and with things like the Purge TV show failing to get much of any attention despite being based on a hit movie series. The last few years have brought the almost total collapse of their scripted programming. Reality TV is just far cheaper, and there's less room on their schedule now that sports makes up a huge part of it. Although I will say what they do have seems to be working. The Chucky show has been a pretty big success for the channel, garnering a lot more online fandom and discussion than I've seen from one of their shows in years. They also changed their slogan again to Here for the Characters, refocusing USA kind of on their old brand. Still, while I have no idea if they'll ever get back to making the kind of blue sky, optimistic shows they were known for, it does kind of feel like that era of TV is in the rearview mirror. Maybe one day, episodic television will be huge on streaming, and studios will once again be rushing to replicate the Monk and Psych style of storytelling. The USA House style had a ton of limitations, most of them self-imposed, and the lesser ones of those shows were really bland. But you know, I checked into a hotel room after a long trip recently and was really happy to find an episode of Burn Notice had just started as I turned on the TV. As far as legacies go, you could do a lot worse than that. Oh, and I would also like to mention that you can watch this video and all my other videos, along with some exclusive ones, ad-free over on my streaming video platform, Nebula, alongside creators like H Bomber Guy, Nando V Movies, Cinema Wins, and so many more. Nebula is creator-driven first, so things like YouTube's algorithm, ads, and bots just aren't an issue there. Plus, it's bundled in with the amazing documentary streaming service CuriosityStream. This month, I've been rewatching episodes of Besieged Fortresses, a really in-depth series about old castles and how they prepared for war. That's just a little bit of what they have to offer, thanks to their docs on history, nature, science, tech, and more. Literally thousands of documentaries. So when you sign up to CuriosityStream, you'll receive an email welcoming you to Nebula as well, getting both services for just $14.79 for an entire year. So sign up now by going to curiositystream.com/captainmidnight. That's curiositystream.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.